Hey everyone, ready to dive in. We're tackling Aristotle today. And knowing you, this is going to be good. I mean, Aristotle, right, his ideas are still, what, thousands of years old. And we're still talking about them.
It's true. His influence is massive. You really can't overstate it, especially in Western thought. And for me, the really interesting thing about Aristotle is the sheer breadth of what he wrote about, logic, ethics, you name it, even politics and science.
Okay, let's rewind for a sec, though. I mean, the guy was born way back in 384 BC in Greece. Can you imagine?
Like,
I get he was actually a student of Plato.
Oh, yeah. Talk about an intellectual powerhouse. Imagine those discussions.
Right, and then he goes on to tutor Alexander the Great. Talk about a resume.
And let's not forget, he founded the Lyceum, his own school. This wasn't just a thinker, He was an institution builder. Sharing what he learned, you can see that impulse to teach.
Which makes sense when you see how much the guy wrote. I mean, seriously, it's like he wrote about everything.
Yeah.
From, like, what is reality to, like, the art of poetry. But maybe the best place to start, with him being called the father of logic and all.
Oh, absolutely. His work on syllogisms was, well, it was groundbreaking. Because before Aristotle, logic wasn't a system, it wasn't formalized. He gave us the framework for how we reason, how we make an argument.
So instead of just like, hey, I think this, Aristotle was all about giving you the tools to be like, I think this because.
Exactly. And that because is huge, right? That's how you know it's not just an opinion. It's like a reasoned argument.
Which, let's be real, we could use a whole lot more of these days.
You got that right.
Okay, so logic, that's how we make sense of the world. But Aristotle, he also went deep on, like, what does it even mean to live a good life, am I right?
Right.
And that's where eudaimonia comes in.
Exactly. And now, see, eudaimonia is often translated as happiness, but it's way bigger than that. I like to think of it as flourishing. Like you're living in a way that you reach your full potential as a human being. You're firing on all cylinders.
So it's not just like fleeting moments of, pleasure here or there. It's about like an entire life of purpose and virtue.
Yes. And for Aristotle, virtue was the key to achieving eudaimonia. That's why he came up with the doctrine of the mean. He was basically arguing that virtue, it's about balance, finding that sweet spot between two extremes.
Okay, I like it. Give me an example. How does this whole, like, doctrine of the mean thing actually play out?
Okay, let's take courage. So, too little courage, right? And you're, cowardly, but go too far the other way, and you're reckless. What Aristotle's saying is that true courage, it's that sweet spot right in the middle. It's about being able to make choices, choices that line up with reason, with balance.
Finding that middle path. Yeah, okay. I think I'm getting that. But how do we actually, like, do that, find that balance? What do you say about that?
He was a big believer in active self-cultivation. He'd tell us to build good habits, practice things like being honest, being generous, those virtues, and just constantly trying to make the choices that are going to lead you closer to your best self.
Interesting. So it's about recognizing that we've got both extremes within us, the potential for both, but then it's on us to consciously choose that path of moderation.
Exactly. He wouldn't want us to suppress our emotions or be passive. No way. Instead, it's more about hey, understand your tendencies, know yourself, and then actively steer yourself towards virtue.
Okay, so that takes some serious self-awareness right there. So we've covered logic, ethics, the good life. Did Aristotle ever get into how we structure society? I mean, did he talk politics at all?
Are you kidding? Aristotle dove headfirst into politics. He was all about it. He believed that a good society, a well-structured society, it wasn't just about the rules, the laws. It was about creating a space, an environment where everyone could, you guessed it, flourish.
So, my own personal eudaimonia is affected by the society I live in?
100%. They're totally connected. So, naturally, he had some thoughts on the ideal setup.
Okay, yeah. So, what do you think was the best way to run things?
Well, just like with virtue, Aristotle thought balance was key when it came to governing. He was always wary of extremes. He saw how democracy could work, but also, too much of a good thing. He recognized that it could easily tip over into mob rule.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. But then on the flip side, you've got all the power concentrated in the hands of just a few people, an oligarchy. And he saw how dangerous that could be too. Nope, Aristotle, he thought a strong middle class, that was the ticket, the key ingredient for a stable and flourishing society.
Interesting. So it's like he's applying that doctrine of the mean idea, but at a societal level, finding that middle ground between too much power in one place versus another.
It's amazing how relevant that still is. Right?
Totally. I mean, you can see those tensions playing out everywhere today.
It's uncanny. But, it's important to remember that Aristotle's influence, it goes way beyond just politics, too. I mean, we think of him as a philosopher, sure, but he was also like a proto-scientist. He was laying the groundwork for the scientific method.
Hold on, wait. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this. I thought we were talking about the guy who loved logic,
Yeah.
breaking down arguments.
Yeah.
How does that translate to studying plants and stars and stuff?
Well, to Aristotle, it was all connected. He thought you should apply that same systematic thinking, that rigorous approach to understanding, well, everything. So he studied it all, animals, plants, you name it. He was even observing the weather patterns, cataloging stars, and he always emphasized observation, categorization, looking for those cause and effect relationships in the natural world.
So instead of just accepting things as they were, he wanted to dig deeper, figure out the why behind it all.
Exactly. He championed evidence, like actually gathering data. And this wasn't just like thinking about it. This was observation, experimentation, this approach. I mean, it was revolutionary, and it's still the foundation of how we do science today.
Okay, well, my mind is a little blown right now. This wasn't just some philosopher in an armchair, huh? This is a guy who got out there, got his hands dirty, looked at the world around him.
You got it. And I think that's a big part of what makes his work so enduring. He brings together that abstract, philosophical way of thinking with a very grounded study of the natural world.
Like he saw how everything's interconnected. I mean, the logic, the ethics, the politics, even the natural world. It all fits together somehow.
It really does. And that brings us right back to Eudaimonia, doesn't it?
It's like he's saying, go ahead, think about the universe. That's great. But don't forget, you got to live in it too.
Exactly. And to really live well, that's where eudaimonia comes in. It's that constant learning, growing, engaging with the world around you, which, it makes you wonder, how would Aristotle deal with all the, complexities of our world today?
Oh, man, what a question, right? I mean, think about it. We're just bombarded constantly. Information overload, choices, distractions, everywhere. So what do you think? How do you say we find that, that eudaimonia, that flourishing with all this noise around us all the time?
I think he'd be, blown away by just how much we know now, how much information is out there. But at the same time, I think he'd remind us that wisdom. It's not about just, hoarding information. It's about figuring out what actually matters. What's the important stuff?
Cut through the clutter, right?
Yeah.
Focus on what's essential. Man, I feel that.
Totally. And I think he'd be all about balance in our modern lives, too. Finding that middle path. Again, balancing those big ambitions with, our responsibilities to other people. And technology. I bet he'd say it's a tool. It's powerful, but you got to use it mindfully.
Right. Otherwise, it's just going to sidetrack you. You'll never get to what's important, like building relationships, contributing something to the world.
Exactly.
It's like he'd want us to use our reason.
Yeah.
That logic he was so into. To navigate this crazy digital world.
Yeah.
To help us make the choices that lead to, a better life, a more fulfilling life, not just a busier one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Aristotle's message, it's such a good reminder, especially now. Real flourishing comes from living your values, seeking balance, and never forgetting that we're all in this together. We're all human.
And that is a wrap on our deep dive into Aristotle. We covered it all. Folks, syllogisms, eudaimonia, the whole deal. I hope you got as much out of it as I did.
It's been a pleasure. Aristotle, he always delivers.
Until next time, keep asking the big questions. And as the great Aristotle might say, dare to be wise.